Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Matias Sports Podcast, episode 13. I have another great guest with me. I got Nick Cattles of 98.5, and he also hosts his own show or podcast, the Nick Cattles Show or Podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, man. How you doing?
Doing well. I appreciate, you coming on. I've had a bunch of great guests in the 12 episodes before, especially guys from 98.5. A little introductory if you want to do that before we dive in right into the meat and bones of things of the Patriots training camp. And hopefully you have enough time to get to the Red Sox, but introduce yourself to the folks out there.
Sure. I mean, I've worked at a bunch of different places throughout the last, I don't know, man, 12, 13 years now. It's 98.5 is kind of where I started again. I started in Providence a long time ago. And then I got back into radio after being out for a couple of years at 98.5 when we launched back in 2009. And was there for a couple of years. I went down to Virginia to do full-time afternoons hosting down there. And then I came back to Boston to work with Adam Jones at night. And then I went back to Virginia and also program director job down there in Virginia as well. And then recently, right before I got back to 98.5 a couple months ago, I was out in Sacramento for about a year and a half, working out there, and came back for personal reasons, family reasons, and have been doing the podcast and some part-time 98.5 stuff since the podcast started last September, so almost a year ago. And like I said, 98.5 a couple months so far.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, that's great. You've been all over the place, Virginia a couple of times, Boston a couple of times. And how's the West Coast? Because that's a dream of mine to, visit the West Coast maybe someday.
Yeah, it's cool. It's it's a little bit of a different vibe. I was out in Northern California, so I worked in Sacramento. I lived in Roseville, which was about 20 to 30 minutes north of Sacramento. I liked it. I liked it a lot. The weather is great for most of the year. It does get super hot. People wonder. It does get super hot, and it stays super hot for a while. Not humid, but it's really, really hot. The sun is powerful out in the West, man. I'll tell you
Yeah,
that. If you haven't been out on the West Coast,
I haven't.
the sun is just different. The sun punches you in the face out in the West. So, but it was great. I was a couple hours away from Lake Tahoe. Went there a couple times with the wife. Was a couple hours away, 90 minutes away from Napa Valley. Went with the wife out to Napa for a weekend one time. Went down to LA just once for a few days to check that out. But yeah, man, I like the weather. Super expensive, but the vibe is different. The people are cool. So, it was overall a really cool experience. And, if anybody asked me, would you live out there again? Yeah, I mean, I would live out there again if I wasn't so tied to New England and Boston sports and had
hmm
my family here. If I was more, if I was looking to go travel more and all that, I wouldn't mind living out in the Northern California area again. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, before we jump, like I said, into the Pats and Sox, I have a buddy that usually goes every year. He's big into drifting. He loves it out there. I mean, he visits it, LA, wherever he goes. I mean, he's been trying to get me to go there, but that's the end of that. I just wanted to hear how the West Coast stories are. I mean, that's a couple people I've heard that it's great to go out there and visit and stuff like that.
Yeah, it is. It's cool, especially nowadays. Like, if I was working, like I worked for a year for ESPN Radio National, I did some stuff with them. A lot of times now you can, if you're working nationally or whatever, you can really live anywhere you want to live. But California was cool. Just again, super expensive. You'd have to deal with that, but it was a lot of red tape too, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of rules and regulations that you got to
Yeah.
get, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, man, I'll tell you, like I got my truck registered out there, and it cost me like over $600 to get it registered. I was like, what?
God.
Change to register my truck for 1 year or whatever it was. So yeah,
That's crazy. Oh my God.
yeah.
But I want to dive into the meat and bones here. Start first with Patch training camp, day 6. It hasn't been really good news, Nick. I've I hear you talk about, on 98.5 when you're filling in for Joe Murray. I mean, everybody at 98.5 is great. So, I appreciate what you guys do. I always say that. I love listening to you guys. But I heard Barth earlier on Felger and Maz. May, the past couple of days, obviously it's been a little downward spiral, but he kind of said it seemed like it wasn't as bad as the last 2 days, but he's still not there. So elaborate on what you've heard or what you've seen.
Yeah, I've been out there the last couple of days for the padded practices, and I thought yesterday was a rough day for him. I thought it was less rough today. Look, it's a timing thing with him. He seems to be a little bit sped up. He hasn't, been the most accurate guy, which we knew coming out of North Carolina that he wasn't always the most accurate guy to begin with. So, the accuracy hasn't been there consistently. But I think it's more of just an internal clock situation with him where he's a little bit sped up, which happens to a lot of young guys, especially early on with padded practices. And I just keep going back to a couple of things. It's not to excuse how he's played because, again, he has not been good the last couple of days that I've been there. But I also want to remind people that are listening or watching or whatever, you got to remember that, number one, this guy was a raw prospect coming out. When we talked about him getting drafted by the Patriots, it was always about potential and it was always about high ceiling, maybe not a super high floor. So we have to keep that in perspective. He hasn't played a ton of football the last 3-4 years, and he's a raw quarterback. And so I did not anticipate him, being great from the jump or looking like he was the most quarterback, ready guy in all of football. So that's number one. Number two, he's also not working with the number ones, and he's working with the backup offensive line. Sometimes some of the guys that are really on the third offensive line. I'll give you an example. Antonio Mafi today, he's just brutal snapping the football. And he was out there playing center for Drake Maye because David Andrews has been out the last couple days. So Nick Leverett jumped to the top offensive line. So you got Mafi out there, and almost every single snap is by the shoelaces of Drake Maye or like above his head. He had to catch one, snap, one-handed at one point. So in the pass catchers, Mitchell Wilcox dropped a couple footballs yesterday that he threw to him, hit him right in the hands. So, I think there's a combination of different factors all adding up to him not looking great or even good, but it's really early. And I said this back at the draft, Ken, when you look at that draft pick at number 3, you swing big and understand that pick was more for 25, 26 than it was for 24.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, obviously, I've seen some clips, Patriots CLNS. I know you're affiliated with them. The Patriots, social media accounts, stuff like that. I'm seeing Maye like throwing like nice little darts to rookie Jalen Polk. He's grabbing it over his shoulder, over the defender or the corner. I mean, there's some promises for sure, but it's still very early in his career. I keep hearing Brissett's like not the star of, training camp, but he's definitely the clear favorite, as Coach Mayo said that he will be starting week 1. So it seems like Maye and Brissett are really like a far gap, right? What you've seen so far, only 6 days in and
Yeah.
second day of padded practice.
Right now, I would say that Brissett is absolutely ahead of Maye. And, I don't know what kind of gradations we want to put on it, whether it's significant or a large gap but he is clearly the quarterback that is most ready to start for this team right now. Will that be the case 3 weeks from now, 1 month from now? We don't know. But I thought Brissett was really freaking good yesterday. I thought he was pretty good today. I didn't think he was as good today as he was yesterday. I thought the defense stepped up and played better today. And DeMarcus Covington was all sorts of revved up watching his defense play out there. But I thought the defense stepped up and the offense took a little bit of a step back in totality, even Brissett and, some of the other guys that had better days yesterday.
One thing that did catch my attention too on the way home from work was Bart saying that, the offensive line looked, pretty comfortable, gave Brissett like a pocket presence today. Was it today he was referring to, I believe? Because, they wanted an update from camp today.
Yeah, there was one particular play that really stood out. It was, I think it was a crossing route to KJ Osborne a little bit downfield, and Brissett had a while. I mean, he had a while standing there in the pocket. And I think the offensive line, if there is a silver lining from the last couple of days, that top offensive line does look like it's improving. I don't know if I'd say it's great by any stretch of the imagination, but they do look like they're improving. That 5 front of Caden Wallace at left tackle, so at left guard. Of course, Andrews has missed the last couple of practices, so it's been Leverett at center with Owenu on the right side at guard, and then Okorafor at right tackle. That offensive line, those 4 out of the top 5 guys, they do look like they have figured some things out, and they have looked better the last couple of days. And I thought today was another solid day. So I think the O-line, at least the starters, they have stacked a couple of days here. It might make you feel a little bit better about how they project as we get ready for the season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, how has Caden Wallace looked? I know he's just the rookie, that they drafted early this year in April. He's the Penn State rookie, correct?
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah. How's he look so far as he's probably in and out of the rotation early on?
good. I mean, he's their left tackle for I think the last 4 practices now. They slid him over to the left side on Friday, and so he was there Friday, Sunday, and then the first 2 padded practices this week. And I think he's looked good. There's been a couple times where he's lost some one-on-ones in the back of the field. He lost, 1 or 2 of those one-on-ones today in those pass rush drills, but he did a very good job yesterday in those drills, and I think on the field, aside from a false start, which had him in a core 4 running a lap yesterday. Outside of that, he looks like he could be a player for you. Now, am I going to sit there and tell you he's going to be excellent? I'm not going to go that far, but so far, early on in the process, early on with these first 2 padded practices, he has not been a problem, which is good. And I think it's also good that he moved to the left side and has not been a problem. So if they found somebody who could play at least average football at left tackle in this draft a few months ago, that's a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, who was the other tackle that they drafted? Was it Landon Robinson? I've heard his name here and there. I mean, since April.
It's
He's
uh
a
it's
guard. I'm sorry. Yeah, guard.
it's
But
Layden Robinson. And
Layden Robinson. Thank you for the correction. Sorry, I was a little off on the name.
yeah,
But
it's all good. He has I would say yesterday he had a really good day. He stood out. Today a couple of iffy
hiccups.
plays out there, but again, rookie, right? And going off of yesterday though, and some of today, he showed a little bit today. It's a process, and they're not necessarily going to ask him to start right away. Right now, they feel pretty good with So and Owenu at guard. Now, maybe if a core 4 flames out at right tackle, and you have to swing, and Calvin Anderson doesn't work out at right tackle, and you've got to end up swinging Owenu back to right tackle, which was the original plan this offseason, then you might have to look towards Robinson to sub in at right guard. But right now, I think he's mostly going to be, that third guard in line behind Owenu on the right side and So on the left side. And then you also have Nick Leverett, who's the backup center, but he's also been a guard at the NFL level. So he's somebody that can play guard. But Robinson, I think he had, from what I heard from people that have been there, more than I have. I've only been there 3 times so far in this camp season. But yesterday was Robinson's best day. Today, like I said, much like the other parts of the offense, kind of took a step back, but he had a really good day yesterday.
Oh, that's great to hear. Staying on the offensive line, has there been any sign of Cole Strange there? At least joining his guys, maybe not doing reps because obviously he's still recovering from that injury, but has there
Yeah.
been any sign of him like at least showing up with his teammates at all?
I haven't seen him. I'd imagine he's getting treatment. I'd imagine he's going through, a rehab process. He might not hit the field this year. I mean, if he does get out there, we're talking probably late November or sometime in December. And at that point, I mean, you're already almost halfway through your season. And if the offensive line is playing well, why would you screw around with it? So,
Hmm.
and City So at left guard has looked, he's looked really solid. He had a good rookie season last year. He got better as the year went on. He's looked good on the left side. So I don't think they'll have any urgency to throw Cole Strange back out there, even when he is healthy, if he ever is healthy again.
Yeah, for sure. Staying on the rookies topic, but now we're going to the pass catchers. Jalen Polk, as I brought up earlier, Javon Baker. I've been hearing great things, out of camp, what they've been doing. What's your thoughts seeing Baker and Polk, the first year players at camp?
I would say 2 different guys at the receiver position. Baker is more of an explosive big play type of receiver. I think Polk can make big plays. He made a big play downfield today in the end zone with a nice catch over the top. But he is, I think, mostly going to be one of those possession receivers for the most part. I think you'll see a lot of his work done underneath 10 yards, maybe up to 15 yards. But I think they're going to use him in that role.
Sure, like
And
short yardage, in other words.
well, not short yardage, like
Yeah.
intermediate. I mean, some short yardage. He's caught a lot of passes within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. It's for a lot of different reasons, I think. First of all, the offensive line at times, especially when we talk about the backup offensive line. And early in camp, pretty much everybody on the offensive line, it was a little bit of a scramble drill up front. So, you got to get rid of the football quickly. And I think it's another part of it where, you want to make some of these throws easy on the quarterbacks to get them in a little bit of a rhythm. He's caught a lot of passes underneath 10 yards, caught a lot within 5 to 8 yards of the line of scrimmage. But I think he'll be pretty much 20 yards and under for the most part. A lot of his big plays are going to come from yak, or, they're going to be schemed up. He can make contested catches downfield. He made a bunch of them in Washington, right? He made a bunch of them for Michael Penix. So he is capable of doing that. I just wouldn't say we're going to see that consistently from him, or at least not as consistent as we'll see bigger plays from Baker. Baker's going to be, I think, the guy who's more downfield, more stretching the defense, and we've seen that throughout camp where he can electrify a crowd. Now, I will warn people, there are moments where Baker kind of gets lost in the shuffle, and so he might be one of those guys that gives you a big game and then the next couple of weeks, not so much. He might be a little hot and cold. We'll see. But when he shows out, I mean, he shows out. He has some really good skill catching the football at high points. So I think Baker's a more explosive guy downfield. You'll see more of that from him than Polk, and Polk will be more of your possession guy.
Yeah, everybody keeps saying Baker's got that dog in him. So he's got that chip on his shoulder ever since he was drafted out of UCF. Like, I'm the best, blah, blah, blah. It's like, hey, you got to prove yourself, obviously. But it's good to have that strong-handed mentality. I mean, if Bill was here, he'd probably tell him to tone it down a little bit. But new regime, see what happens. Yeah, I mean, it's good to see these receivers step up. I mean, I don't think we're seeing any N'Keal Harrys on the roster. I mean, Tyquan Thornton, I've heard ups and downs from, whatever the media reported. He showed some promise, but it's every single like training camp. That guy's like a hot and cold guy. Like he shows great, progress. Then God forbid he gets hurt, and then he kind of goes on a downward spiral. So, I mean, any news on Kenny Bourne? I know he was stretching with his guys. I think I seen it over the weekend, whatever, on the social media that he was just out there with his guys.
More of the same. He's out there. He's in shorts. He's not practicing by any means. He's walking around, some light jogging on and off the field as practice begins and as practice ends. Nothing strenuous. I would not be surprised if he ends up missing, the first month and a half of the season. That would not surprise me. Hopefully he's a little bit ahead of the timetable, but I'm not banking on Kendrick Bourne to be much of anything until, week 6, week 7, week 8 of this upcoming year. So I think they'll be cautious with him. They'll make sure that he's feeling absolutely 100% before he gets back out there and actually starts catching passes and running routes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it all depends what, the season's going to be. As you say, week 6, week 7, week 8, they could be 500, 3-4, 2-5, who knows? But
Yeah.
I know it's going to be a gauntlet. Like I've talked to people in the past, it's going to be a gauntlet the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season anyways. You got San Francisco, Cincinnati, Seattle, the list goes on and on, but still. Jumping around, biggest hottest take that I keep seeing is Matthew Judon. I was a little taken back yesterday. I seen it on Twitter and I was like, Mayo's having a casual conversation. I don't know what they're talking about, but it's basically compared to somebody at work just kind of sitting down on the job and your boss kind of goes up to you and has a conversation. That's what I kind of compared it to, in like a real life situation. Like you're just sitting around, your boss kind of comes up to you, you're kind of disgruntled about something, and then you're either told to hit the showers or you're fired. Obviously, you wasn't fired, but it's a contract, issue going on. But what's your thoughts? Were you there for that yesterday when Mayo and Judon talked, when he was sitting down?
I was. Yeah, they were well in the back of the field, so I didn't see it. I don't know how many people saw the Mayo interaction because they were pretty far away from everybody, unless you had the binoculars and you were watching.
Happened to be right there. Yeah.
Right. It came out later because NBC Sports Boston, the camera guys, did a great job of getting it on film. So here's what I would say. There was obvious tension to me, when you watch that video from NBC Sports Boston. It's rather obvious that Mayo was not happy with Judon. I would say it wasn't as big of a deal until the fact that, Judon came back onto the field. He walked off and then he felt the need to get back onto the field and, seek Elliott Wolf and Matt Groh and then have a more animated conversation with those two guys in which he did most of the talking. and then he walked away. And there was one thing as he was walking away, he stopped in his tracks and he looked back at Wolf and Groh and seemed to give them a little bit of a parting shot. Now, what was said, I have no idea. But usually when you're in a heated, animated conversation and then you walk away and stop and turn back around and say one more thing, it's usually not, hey, thanks for the conversation, I enjoyed that. So,
No.
I don't know what it was, that was said exactly, specifically. But so, just kind of reading the body language as he walked off the field, he looked like he was very, very unhappy. And everything that's come out in the last, 18 to 24 hours since that happened would tell you he's a very unhappy guy right now. Phil Perry reporting today that they're not close. There's a significant gap with the contract conversations going on, financially. And I know that Mike Giardi had a report this morning saying they were far apart. So it doesn't seem like Henry McKenna, you go back a couple of weeks ago, said that they weren't close. So they're not getting along right now. And, I thought, I understand that Judon is frustrated and irritated. I get it, but you can't do what he did yesterday. And, he really cut the knees out of the first year head coach by having that play out publicly and then coming back out and talking to Wolf and Groh. Now you're also undermining the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So, Phil Perry reported today that Judon was not even at the facility, let alone not at practice. He was not at the facility. So I don't think things are going well between the two sides. How is it going to end? I'm not sure. But if I were the Patriots, I'd be at least entertaining the idea of moving on from him, because I don't need that distraction. I don't need an unnecessary problem in the locker room when I'm trying to reset my culture.
Yeah, I mean, I respect what he's done since 2021, since they, spent big with Henry and all them guys in 2021 when Matt got, drafted. But yeah, I didn't like that, sense of character from him yesterday. I mean, I get you disgruntled, you want to get paid. You want to probably the best defenders in the league or defensive ends or, whatever. I mean, obviously he's 31, he's getting older. What does he really realistically want? Does he want like a 4 or 5 year deal and just to play until his mid to late 30s? Or does he just want like a short term, just pay me the money and I'll just shut up and play? I mean, he's been pretty solid for us. Unfortunately, he had an injury last year, so he's still kind of recovering from that. But you're right. I mean, he's been outspoken lately and he has a right to be pissed, but just don't be acting like the way you were, just be an adult about it. Respect Coach Mayo and the staff and Grow and Wolf and hopefully just fix things behind the scenes. But that's all I got to really say about that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything before we moved on. I know we're kind of short on time for the Red Sox. I want to touch on that.
I think it's a tricky situation. I think it's a tricky situation because he's going to be 32 in a couple of weeks. He's coming off of that injury and the surgery. And look, I'm sure he wants one more big fat contract before he walks away from the league, right? And so he's looking at this and saying, man, I'm going to be 32 in a few weeks. This might be my last shot to get one of those 3 or 4 year deals that bring me back some pretty significant money. Meanwhile, the Patriots, they're looking at it saying, hey, you're going to be 32 in a couple weeks and you just had a biceps tear and you just had surgery. So they're not going to have, especially part of a rebuild, they're not going to have any kind of urgency to get something long-term done with him. So it's a very sticky negotiation, and we'll see how it unfolds. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, the preseason's what? It starts this week with the Hall of Fame game between Green Bay and Houston, I believe, and then
So the
Patriots
Patriots' first preseason game is
next
August
week.
8th.
Yeah,
So
I
I think
figured.
it's a week from Thursday.
Yeah, and who they hosting again? I kind of forget.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
I know they got they got the Eagles. I
for a joint
believe
practice on the 13th. I did see that.
a couple days later in in a preseason game. But let me look that up. I'll look
Yeah,
it
no
up.
problem. Yeah, no problem. Thank you. I should actually know off the top of my head, but I don't.
So it's
Carolina. Okay.
preseason game number 1.
So first year head coach, Bryce Young, yada yada yada. I mean, I'm not nothing to write home about.
No, a lot of people will tell you those are a lot of projections, a lot of these power rankings will say those are the 2 worst football teams in the NFL this year. So,
Oh, so the battle for 32nd place in the whole NFL. There you
yeah,
go.
I guess we'll see how much better than the other.
Yeah, so obviously you've been looking at the Twitter feed. Is there any news moving on to the Red Sox as they sit at 56 and 49 besides the Lucas Sims deal earlier today?
Not yet. The Lucas Sims deal is interesting. Cora told the media before the game tonight against the Mariners that he's going to be a late inning reliever. He's going to be at least an option once you get to the seventh, eighth inning. So that was sorely needed. Obviously, I mean they've blown a handful of leads. They've lost a handful of games due to blown leads since the All-Star break, since they came back, and the bullpen has been the major issue. So nothing kills a baseball team more than a blown lead, if not two blown leads late in a game. It'll kill your spirit. So without Justin Slayton, who's, who knows how far away he is, Chris Martin is supposed to be throwing a bullpen within the next couple days. So he's closer than Slayton is, but you've also had Kenley Jansen, who's been a little bit shaky since the All-Star game. I mean, they desperately needed an arm, and at least they have one arm. We'll see if they can do anything else. I mean, we're recording this with about 30 minutes left to the deadline, so we'll see if they can pull together something else. I wouldn't mind another starter. I wouldn't mind another reliever. I would absolutely not mind a right-handed bat. So we'll see if they can do any of those things beyond what they've done. But, I do think they've at least gone out. They've added Jansen, right? They added Paxton. Paxton pitches tonight. We'll see how he looks. And then they go out and they get Sims, which should help their bullpen. So they have added. We'll see if they add any more.
They also claimed, I believe his name's Johan Ramirez from the LA Dodgers as well. I think Cora said he might be in uniform tonight for the game, against Seattle. So we'll see if he gets his debut with the Sox tonight or tomorrow, some point this week.
Yeah.
But I do want to touch on the trade yesterday. So you trade your top 6 prospect or a top 10 prospect, which Nick York, I believe it was the 2023, I seen minor league player of the year for the Sox, maybe in their organization or whatever it was, maybe AA or whatever it was last year.
I don't know if he won the minor league player of the year. He might have. Yeah. I know he had a big year last year. He came back. He had a fantastic first season after being drafted. Then he took a big step back, and then he kind of found his way again last year, and he was hitting above 300 at AAA this year.
Yeah. So I just wanted to touch on that trade with the Pirates with Quinn. I'm drawing a blank on his last name. It's
Priester.
Priester. Thank you. Trying to pronounce his name. I mean, he's another, 23, 24-year-old guy. Apparently not the best record, not the best ERA, but you figure you'd get more value for a top 10 or top 8 prospect in your organization, and you get a reliever. I'm not going to say he's a bum, but he's excited to be with the Woo Sox. He gets optioned to Worcester. I just figured for York, you could probably get like I don't know, a halfway decent starter or even like some kind of reliever that Boston fans might know from another team, not a guy that is kind of shaky and mediocre from the Pirates.
Well, a couple of things. By the way, York was the 2021 minor league player of the year.
Sorry, I was a couple years off.
I was remembering I know his first year in the minors was really good. So he was the minor league player of the year back in 21. And then he kind of took a downturn in 22, came back with a good 23 and was playing pretty well this year in 24. So a couple of things, York, number one, there's some question about his defensive ability. Will he be a defender at the major league level? Can he handle playing on a nightly basis? There's some questioning whether or not he's going to be a regular or if he's going to be more of a spot kind of bench guy. He plays second base. He plays left field. There's some question whether or not he can play left field in the majors. So I think when you look at it, the Red Sox, they have a lot of depth in the top 10 to 12. When you look at their top prospects, they have a lot of depth on the middle infield. They got a lot of shortstops. They got second baseman, guys that could play the middle infield. And so I think what they did was they took from an area that was a surplus and they decided that, hey, man, we don't have a lot of arms. I mean, you saw that in the draft this year. They drafted so many pitchers because the farm system, you think about their top players in the farm system, almost all of them are position players in like the top 10 to 12. So
they are correct.
I think this is the idea of, hey, we can trade from a surplus middle infield. I don't think they thought that Nick York was going to be an everyday second baseman. I don't think they believe he's going to be an everyday player. And let's take a guy who was a first round pick, has shown flashes. He has shown flashes of being good. And I think they really trust, Breslow really trusts himself, and he really trusts Bailey to put this program together and work with younger pitchers and get more out of them. So I think they see a guy in Priester that they feel has a pretty good ceiling of maybe a middle of the rotation guy. And why not take a swing on a guy who might be able to give you middle of the rotation innings versus somebody that you might not have a spot for,
Yeah, I figured he wasn't going to fit with the Sox anytime soon.
So I think that's what that was all about.
All right, thanks for the clarification. Because me looking at it, I'm like top six for a guy that's still young, has some potential upside. We'll see. I mean, obviously these are the experts. Former Breslow, he used to pitch for the Sox and teams and this and that. He's been in the Cubs front office, I should say. But I mean, I want to touch on Duran, seeing we're short on time here. Jarren Duran just been having a incredible on cloud nine this year. I mean, All-Star game MVP. He's just all over the field. He makes great catches. He's stealing bases. He's part of the speedy Red Sox, the running Red Sox. So, your thoughts on Duran's 2024 season, which my dad and I have talked about in years past. Like, this kid's not going to make it, and he's actually making it since maybe what, last year, late last year, give or take.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at it, and he's a tremendous story, right? Getting through some of the personal adversity,
Yep.
getting through some adversity on the field. He's got just a lot of tools, and he's got obviously tremendous speed. He's a good hitter, can hit for some power, and I think he's somebody, most importantly, that just he works his ass off, and he's going to get everything out of his talent that he can get out of his talent. And I think that's why you saw somebody like Chris Sale during All-Star weekend, point to Duran and say, he's my favorite All-Star. Because when I was in Boston, I saw what this guy was going through, and I saw the work that he put in. And I think you can now look at Duran and, from what he's done so far this year, you can certainly look at him and say, hey, he's a bona fide guy. He's a bona fide outfielder who I don't know if he's going to be, a 5 or 6 time All-Star, but I think the jury was still out on him before the season. And now you can look at him and be fairly confident that he's going to be somebody that could play center field for you for the next 8 to 10 years, if that's what you want him to do, left field, right field, whatever. Right. So I think he's a mainstay on this ball club now. And if you can look at Duran and you can look at Rafaela, and then you can look at maybe Roman Anthony coming up next year.
That's not a bad outfield. Mixed with Abreu too in there, unless
Yeah.
they move on from him.
Yeah, Abreu is a guy that I wonder, right? Like,
Yeah.
I like Abreu, I like him, but I do wonder if he's going to be the odd man out. He's left-handed. They are so left-handed heavy, and a lot of I mean, if you look at their top 3 prospects, they hit left-handed, right? Myers lefty, Teal's lefty, and Anthony's lefty. You've got Casas, you've got Devers, you've got Duran. I mean, it's just so loaded with lefties. That I would not be surprised if Abreu is the odd man out and he gets dealt for an arm or he gets dealt for a right-handed hitter in the offseason. And then you go into 2025, again, thinking that it's going to be Duran, Rafaela, and Anthony. And, I also think you look at what Masa Yoshida's done over the past month or so. Looks like he's getting
on.
Yeah. So, you could look at it and say to yourself that year 2, he was kind of adjusting and the league was adjusting to him. And then, the second half, they're adjusting to him. And then this first half this year, you can look at it and you could say, well, he was injured and he missed a huge portion of the first half of the year. So maybe he's now adjusting and maybe he's getting his wits about him at the plate, because over the last month and a half, he's been tremendous. So if he can look like he looked at least close to that first half of the first year, then now you're talking about somebody who could play DH for you and make a bit of a difference. So I think you could start to see some of these pieces, not just for this year, but for next year. And Duran obviously is one of the keys.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I hope we make the playoffs. I mean, if they don't add anybody else in the next 22 minutes or so, it is what it is. But I mean, I'm hoping that we're a playoff team. I mean, could we make some noise? Yeah. I mean, if we play the Yankees, you play Tampa if they get in, you play the Orioles, that's going to be tough. But I mean, we'll see what happens. But Nick, I appreciate it. I know we're short on time here, but feel free to shoot out your socials to everybody and make sure you give him a great follow because he's great.
Yeah, I mean, look, you could check me out on Twitter. I'm there mostly, like 90% of the time. 90% of my social media stuff is Twitter, which I know. I
Me
get
too.
it's just an awful website, but it is what it is. I'm on there all the time due to my career and what we do. So
Yep.
it's at Nick C Radio, at Nick C Radio on Twitter. And the podcast, Nick Cattle Show. Just look for the Nick Cattle Show on YouTube and you can find it. Spotify, Apple Pods as well.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, Nick. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cam, man. I appreciate you.